There we go. Hello. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm a little rusty. Also, my name is not IIBA Webinar. My name is Susan Moore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at the International Institute of Business Analysis. And I want to thank all of you guys for joining us today. We're going to be talking about something that clearly is of interest because we ended up being sold out, and that does not happen very often with our webinars. So we want to thank you guys for taking some time out of your day to join us. First, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I have introduced myself. Today's webinar is free and public and also being live streamed on YouTube for the first time ever. Just a little something that we are trying. Um, we love it when you chat with each other, and you guys are clearly doing that. So keep doing that because that's such a great way to get connected and engaged with each other. We are going to take some questions, and you can put that into the Q&A box. If you are hearing us on YouTube, um, you can add that, I think, in YouTube, and then we will make sure that we get those comments and questions over into our Q&A box. So no worries, we've got a plan for you today. Some of you have already found the reactions, and we've even got some enhanced reactions. Scott can see these, and it gives
I
him a
can.
good idea of like what you're thinking. So please use those.
Yeah, if I
Uh,
see a lot of these, I might change what I'm saying, right?
that's right. That's right. We are recording today's session. You will get a link to the recording and the slide deck 24 hours after today's session. And then we also send out something usually about the next week called the Webinar Extra. It just gives you some additional materials, links to the other parts of this four-part series that you can get more information on. I feel like I'm forgetting something important. Oh, I am going to be dropping some links in. This is link heavy today. So Scott has tasked me with making sure that I keep up with links so that you guys have access to all of those things. Um, Scott Helmers is first of all, good dude, musical theater person like myself. We have bonded over that. There's a
Yep.
trombone in his background. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. He is also a Microsoft MVP. In Visio, you may recognize him. He's got LinkedIn learning courses as well. Also, consultant. He's probably going to tell you more. I'm going to stop talking and just turn it over to you.
Okay, that's fair. Well, you mentioned you were a little rusty at doing this after taking the summer off. I feel the same way, and so I'll beg everyone's indulgence. This is also a bit of an exploration for me, a little bit different. As I said to Susan a few minutes ago, before you all arrived. I normally present webcasts like this on things that I know really, really well, often related to Visio and Power BI and process mapping in a general sense. This is different because what I'm doing today in particular is focusing on four free ways to create process maps. So I've done some exploration in the last few months. These are not software products that I've used in production myself. So you're in a sense you're learning along with me, but I've distilled a lot of what I've learned into what I want to show you today. And we'll walk through the demos for each of these four products. I have a few slides, and there is a QR code and a bit.ly link on the screen at the moment. We'll put that into the chat later in the session as well. That bit.ly link and QR code are also on the slide toward the end of the session. But the majority of what we're going to do is going to be live. So as always happens with live demos, it's interesting. One never knows exactly what will happen, but I have mapped out some things that I hope will be helpful. The session today is about tools that don't cost anything. And when we got such ridiculous pre-registration, ridiculous and wonderful pre-registration numbers, my ego wants to think part of it might be, because of my name. But I think free was probably the big attraction for many of you. So thank you, regardless of what drew you here. Thank you for being here today. The second of the 4 webcasts that I'll be doing between now and January is specifically about LucidChart. So while today is sort of a cruise through and a little bit of a dive into 4 products that are free, we're going to focus in depth on LucidChart in October. And then in early December, we'll focus on my sweet spot, really, on Visio and an add-in for Visio called TaskMap. You'll learn a little bit more about those in just a second, but mostly in December. And then, as Susan mentioned, we're going to talk about AI-assisted process mapping in January. So that's the plan. My background, as Susan mentioned, I'm a consultant. I happen to be in the Boston area, so a little bit north of Boston, for those of you who know any of the East Coast of the United States. My background principally is as a business process consultant for most of the last 25 years. So I help organizations to map their current business processes, design future state processes, that sort of thing. Along the way, 3 of us at Harvard Computing Group created a Visio add-in called TaskMap. And as I mentioned just a second ago, you'll hear more about that coming up in later in the series, in part 3 of the series. I do some work with a company called B2T Training, an organization that's been providing business analysis and agile analysis training for the last 25 years. I am an MVP for Visio, named by Microsoft every year since 2008 in that capacity. And there are just 6 of us with that designation for Visio in the world. I also have a number of courses at LinkedIn Learning. I have a slide toward the end, and I'll list some of those courses for you, especially the ones that are particularly relevant for today's topics. And though most of the print books are now out of print, I have written a number of books about Visio as well. So today we are going to talk about 4 products. We're going to talk about and demonstrate Draw.io, Creately, Wondershare's EdrawMax, and you might be surprised to see Visio on this list because for most people and through most of its history, Visio always had a license fee. Well, there is a free version of Visio, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit. We'll explore the rest of Visio later in the series, but for today, we're going to touch on the part of Visio that is indeed free. Before we jump into Draw.io, which is the first software product I'm going to demonstrate for you, I just want to do a quick refresher on flowchart symbols. And you'll understand why I'm doing this in just a moment. But the idea here is that I want to refresh your memory on what the 2 most common symbols that you see in any flowchart or process diagram, basically a rectangle that represents a step or a task in a process, of an arrow that represents the flow of work or the flow of data through a data diagram, data flow diagram, the start or end shape, and that's one I want you to note particularly, its particular configuration, the size and shape. And then, of course, decisions, sub-processes, or what are commonly referred to in the flowchart standards documents as a predefined process, and then documents, databases, and so forth. Well, I want to set that out because the first thing we're going to look at with Draw.io is a set of capabilities that work really nicely, but have some interesting variations on those standard shapes. How does Draw.io describe themselves? They say that their mission is to provide free, high-quality diagramming software for everyone. I suspect if I asked you to put your hands up, how many of you are familiar with Draw.io, there would be a fair number of you who would respond because it's been around for a couple of decades. In fact, on their website, one of the things it says is that a Draw.io diagram you created in 2005 is still editable in 2025. So lots of people saying me or thumbs up, you've heard of Draw.io and probably used Draw.io. One of the unique features of Draw.io is that they build it as bring your own storage because unlike nearly every other drawing application where there is a backend storage repository, Draw.io is completely bring your own. They don't store your diagrams. In fact, they won't store them. They don't offer that as an option. So when you first engage with Draw.io's website, one of the initial questions is, where would you like to save your diagrams? And that can be in OneDrive or SharePoint or non-Microsoft cloud storage locations, or even on your local hard drive. So you are in charge of where your diagrams are located. And their motto, if you will, is don't worry about licenses, it just works. And in general, that is true. I've got some pros and cons. I'm going to save those until after we demonstrate the software. So let's go to Draw.io, drawio.com or draw.io, or also diagrams.net. I've never been quite sure on the interrelationship between those two domain names. They obviously belong to the same organization, and both of them lead you to the same place. But either draw.io or diagrams.net is how to get started. I'm going to take you to a page where they describe some of their sample diagrams. And I'm going to scroll down and show the diagram types. I think like all of the, in fact, like all of the applications I'm going to show you today, you can do more than just create flowcharts and process maps. I'm going to concentrate just on those. But you can create floor plans and org charts and all kinds of other diagrams with Draw.io, as with the others I'll demonstrate. If I select flowcharts, though, I just want to show you that Draw.io provides a limited set. I think it's the smallest set of sample diagrams of the 4 products I'm going to show you today. They are both viewable and downloadable. There are swim lane diagrams and BPMN diagrams. And indeed, those are the 3 types of diagrams I'm going to emphasize for today: flowcharts, swim lane diagrams, and BPMN. And I'll do that across all 4 products. Just a note flashed on my screen that said my internet connection was unstable, which is highly unlikely. Susan, am I still sounding okay and looking okay on the
You,
screen?
yep, you look fine.
Okay, good. Thank you. Not sure what that was about, but we'll roll with it. Let me just check my notes here. Um, okay, so let's begin with a flowchart. Simplest way to start with almost any kind of process map is just to think basically, think flowchart. So let's go to Draw.io, and I've told Draw.io on this tab that I want to create a new diagram. So it offers me some generic diagram types here, or categories of diagrams. I can select flowcharts and see sample diagrams here, as I can with many other kinds of diagrams. But having chosen basic, I'm going to start with flowchart. So I'm just going to pick blank diagram. We'll start with flowchart and create. And bear with me 1 second on the other screen here while I start my diagram, or the screen zooming utility, just so I have that available here. So when I said flowchart, it said, okay, here's a flowchart. Here's a sample flowchart. Doesn't get much more basic than that. However, I'm going to delete that. I'm going to start a fresh diagram. Notice over on the left, there are a set of shapes. There's a general category here. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to open the category that says flowchart. And I'm also going to do one other thing. By default, this particular page that you see here happens to be in portrait format, vertical format. I'm a firm believer in horizontal or landscape format for process maps in general. If you watched any of the process mapping series I did for Susan and IIBA last fall, that's one of the points I emphasize. I like that because I like a left to right and top to bottom layout. So I'm going to change the page format. In Draw.io, with nothing selected on the page, over on the right-hand side here, over on the right-hand side here, I can choose landscape. And now my page is oriented that way. So a minor detail, but for me, it's important. As usual, we're going to start with a start shape when we draw any process. But I want to point out, and here's where I'm going to come back to that slide I showed you with the preferred orientation and sizing and layout for the shapes in the ANSI flowchart standards, because there are 2 start shapes here. One is a circle, one is an ellipse. Neither of those looks like what I showed you a moment ago. There is down here a terminator, which is actually the ANSI name for the start and end shape. but it's a little bit tall. We might want to adjust that a little bit. So we can do that. We can make it look the way we want to. With all of the tools I'm going to show you, you have two primary ways of getting another shape onto the page. You can, of course, take a shape from the stencil or the palette over here and drag it onto the page. And I'm going to do that and drop a process shape onto the page. But I'm also going to take advantage of the capability that all of the tools I'm going to show you today have, and that is a way to essentially fire a shape onto the page by using a context menu. When I hover over the arrow here, we see four shapes, and I can choose one. The rectangle looks like an obvious choice, and it is indeed a rectangle designed for creating a flowchart in Draw.io, but you notice it doesn't look the same as this. It's a different orientation. Again, the ANSI standard would have it be a shape something like this, probably a little taller, not quite as narrow or not quite as short top to bottom. But again, I don't want to overemphasize the point, but I do want to point out that the shapes in the flowchart stencil for Draw.io don't necessarily conform to what is commonly used for flowcharts. Having done that, though, I'm going to continue, and I'm a lazy guy by nature, so I like useful shortcuts. So I'm going to revert to drawing with the quick draw or the automatic capability when I can. The next thing I'd like to do in my sample flowchart, I'm going to create this essentially the same flowchart in this format and in swim lane format and in BPN format for the various tools. Next thing I want to add is a sub-process shape, but you notice that's not on this quick shapes menu. Well, here's a trick in Draw.io. If I click on that arrow rather than just hover over it, an extra little menu pops up with some more shapes on it. And sure enough, here is the sub-process shape, so I can use that trick to get that shape that I want. Now, here's another Draw.io feature that I like. This start shape that I've modified a little bit by making it a little bit shorter. Let's say I want to reuse that shape or any shape that I've customized. There is over here on the left a section of the stencil area called Scratch Pad. And if I take any shape and drag it over to this Scratch Pad area, then a copy of that shape is now available in the Scratch Pad. And that Scratch Pad is available to me anytime I want to reuse that shape in this or any future drawing. So that's a handy thing. Right now, I'd like to put an end shape over on the right. So I'm going to go to my Scratch Pad and drag that thing over here. And I'll take advantage of the spacing feedback. Notice the arrows that appear, the lines that appear when I match the spacing between this shape and one to its left, and that shape and the one to its left. So I'm going to drop that there, and I can use the arrow. Instead of adding a shape, I'm going to add just an arrow in between. So it fires an arrow across the gap if I click on the arrow, but not on one of the pop-up context shapes. So my process is looking about like what I want it to. I'm going to add some text here. I have on the clipboard, this is going to be a human resources process where we have a request new staff member as our description on the first task. I'm going to add approve question mark for the decision. The sub process is going to be recruit and hire. And this is end over here and start over here. Now, I'm not going to take the time to label every shape in every iteration of this diagram because I'm going to create it multiple times, but I want to start with a version that has all the right text on it so you know what the nature of this process is as we go through. Approve is a question, and there's going to be a yes and a no outcome. In my case, this is the yes arrow, so I'm going to select it and type yes. I now want to add the no path, and I'm going to keep that very simple. I'm going to use the automatic shape firing onto the page to add a shape, a task shape, and I'm going to paste notify requester as the work of that task. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm just going to drag this arrow over to the end shape, and I will finally double click this and select type no. So I now have my process pretty well laid out the way I want it to be. This is as basic as you can get, but it does incorporate 3 or 4 shape types. So you have a sense for what a process map created with or specifically a flowchart created with Draw.io might look like. Now, a couple of things to point out. I like to add hyperlinks because it's much more valuable for an organization if the maps that you create for them have links to other resources. In my case, I've got a sub-process here. I'm going to add a page. So down in the very lower left-hand corner is a plus sign, and I'm going to add a page here, and I'll just double-click on that page name and call it sub-process. Not very original, but it'll get the job done. And click rename. And on this page, I'm just going to very quickly add start, a couple of steps, and end with an end shape over here. So this is as a minimal sub-process, and I'm just going to take the easy way out, and I'm going to call this A and this B. So now we've got some shapes defined on the sub-process page. Well, I want to go back here to page 1, and I want to hyperlink from the sub-process shape to that sub-process page. To do that, right-click, and edit link is further down the menu here, and I can either drag a URL or paste a URL if I'm linking to somewhere else, maybe a document, for example. But in this case, I'm going to link to a page. There's a drop-down list here that shows me the names of my pages, including the one I just renamed. So I'm going to choose sub-process and click OK. And that simple act has added value to the users of my map because they now see, when they select the shape, that there is a sub-process link. So one click, and there we go. I would do the same thing on the end shape here. I'm not going to take time, but I would always ensure that the end of my sub-process links back to where we came from, again, to add value. I like to be in the shoes of the users for whom I'm creating a process map. I mentioned documents. Let's just take a quick moment here, and I'm going to add a document. And this is probably a policy manual of some kind. And we want to add value. We want to hyperlink. So I'm going to use the Control K shortcut. Now, something happened here. I got this box that popped up that says tags on it. Control K is a very commonly used shortcut for creating hyperlinks. In fact, it works in all 3 of the other software products I'm going to show you today. It doesn't happen to work in Draw.io. It does something different. But I can do the same thing I did on that sub-process shape, right-click, edit link, and this time I have a URL I'm going to paste. This is to a document stored in my OneDrive with share rights. And sure enough, we see when I select the shape, here's the link, and when I click on it, it opens a human resources policy manual. So it's that easy to, once again, add even more value for the people who are using your map. That's a flowchart. Now let's take a quick dive into a swim lane diagram. And to do that, I'm just going to add another page. And I'm going to go to the advanced section of the stencils over on the right here, because that happens to be where cross-functional flowchart shapes live. I would kind of expect them to also be in the flowchart section, but they're not, but that's okay. We'll just drag one onto the page here. And I'm going to do very much the same thing. I'm going to drag my custom start shape and do essentially the same thing here. Add a decision, use that trick to click on the arrow and pop up this extra menu to add my sub-process, drag my decision shape over here and connect it. And now the one thing I have to realize is that if this is a swim lane diagram, part of the value of a swim lane diagram is we can specify role names for the lanes. So I'm going to say a manager for this first lane, and perhaps a vice president, I'll just abbreviate VP, and an admin. Really, the decision in this case belongs to the manager, the VP, sorry, the VP, not the manager. The sub-process belongs back here with the manager. The no option, so this is still my approve. And we can I'll just label this one for the sake of making it clear. If my approve is no, then I'm going to have a task here for the admin to notify the submitter that their request was rejected. And that will conclude here with end. So that part of the diagram is much the same, but we have taken advantage of the swim lane, so we now know who does those things. We don't know that from a flowchart. Another note about draw IO that's important is this shape is kind of hanging out here over on the edge. If I want it to be in the swim lane, I'm going to select the swim lane, drag the handle here, and grab it over here and move it. So it's now surrounded. Looks like that end shape on the right is now part of the swim lane, but let's see. If I drag the swim lane, notice that the swim lane, even though it looks like it incorporates that end shape, it doesn't actually. I'm going to undo. Here's a little trick I learned about Draw IO. If I take this shape and just nudge it with my mouse, now it's part of the swim lane. So if you expand the swim lane, the shapes that you surround aren't necessarily incorporated into the swim lane unless you nudge them with the mouse. File that away as a quick tip. Let me check my notes here. Subprocess. Oh, a couple of quick things that are useful to know if you want to move swim lanes around, and often that's useful. Sometimes your concept of the process changes as you're mapping it. You can do that in Draw IO. If you select a lane, you can use the arrow keys to move it down. If I select this lane, the admin lane, and move it up, it does work successfully. Now, when you're moving swim lanes around, you're probably going to need to redraw or reorient some of the lines. That's perfectly fine. But the good news is that the technique works. I can move lanes around by selecting them and using the arrow keys. If I want to delete a lane, I can do so by selecting the lane. And on the Arrange tab, there are a couple of buttons over here that in the table section, this is kind of small, let me zoom in. So I'm on the Arrange tab. We were on the Style tab. I didn't talk about it or the Text tab, but they are here. On the Arrange tab, in the table section are buttons for inserting a new row above, inserting a new row below, or deleting a lane. So let's do that. Let's just insert a row below. And sure enough, the row that I have selected is this top one, and we now have a new row below it. So useful to be able to accomplish that easily, and Draw IO does make it simple. Okay, so let's add one more page, and I'm going to touch on BPMN, but this is going to be short because one of the drawbacks of Draw IO, no puns intended, is that BPN is a somewhat limited capability in this product. I'm going to click More Shapes, and in the menu here, we've got software, networking. In the business category, you'll find BPMN 2.0. So I'm going to add a check mark here and apply, and that causes BPMN shapes to appear. Now we've got a bunch of them here. In fact, we've got a bunch, significant number. One of the things, if you attended my process mapping overview last fall that I mentioned earlier, one of the things I talked about as a drawback of BPMN as a diagramming style is that there are so many variations on each of the shapes. The added specificity is part of the design of BPMN, but that same added specificity causes all of these shape variations to exist. And the reason I'm not going to go very far in describing usage of BPMN with Draw IO is because these shapes are fixed shapes that you have to know what you want and drop it onto the page. So if I want a start shape, for example, I have to know that's in the events category, and I have to know that this is the kind of start shape, the generic start shape that I want. And in the task category, there are like 50 different variations of the task shape here. The basic one is okay, but actually what I want is a task that is designated as a user task. and I'm going to have to drag one on and see whether that's the right one. It's actually not. So I'm going to stop right here. You can create BPMN diagrams with Draw.io, but I would not recommend it. Which brings me to my pros and cons slide. I'm not going to read through this for you. You can download a copy of the slides at the end of the presentation if you'd like. This is my recap of Draw.io. The good news is it is very flexible. You can create lots of diagram types. It's completely free. There aren't even any premium levels available. And not only is there the browser capability, but there is let me just bring it up here for a second. There is a downloadable app. And as the slide suggests, that app is available in all three formats that you might expect: Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So the app looks just about the same. The capabilities between the desktop app and the browser version of Draw.io are very similar. Not exactly the same, but very similar. So that's Draw.io. I took a long time to go through Draw.io because I was setting up some things that I'm going to do much more quickly in these other tools. Creately is a platform for collaboration, first and foremost. Creating diagrams and creating business process diagrams in particular is a subset of the many functions. So if you're familiar with products like Miro or Mural, Creately is more similar to those products. We can use it to create excellent diagrams, process maps in particular, but first and foremost, collaboration is what it's all about. I'll come back to the pros and cons. Let's go straight to the software. So Creately gives me a page that looks like this. I have workspaces that I've created. And oh, by the way, that's a terminology that's important with Creately. And based on what I just said, this will make sense. With Creately, you don't create a new diagram per se. You create a new workspace. And on that workspace, one of the things you might do is create a diagram. So there are predefined flowchart and other styles of workspaces. I'll click on flowchart, and I now have a workspace and also an error message. And one of the things that you'll notice about using Creately in its free form is that there are limits to what you can do, not surprising, and you'll get fairly frequent notices about, oh, by the way, you'll do better if you upgrade to one of the premium versions. I'm going to close this, and we're going to proceed anyway, because I know that what I'm about to do does not run an interference with that restriction. I'm going to drag a start shape onto the page. It looks a little bit more like the one that we want to have for the ANSI, but it's also a little bit tall. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to shorten it a little bit. We can, of course, drag a process shape onto the page, or we can use the fire one onto the page technique, because that exists. One difference with Creately, hovering over the shape does not present the pop-up menu of context shapes. You have to click once on the shape, and then when you hover over the little dot, it turns into a plus sign. Clicking the plus sign shows actually a very nice and flexible menu that shows you a selection of shapes. So it takes 2 clicks to get to this little pop-up menu, but it is a more full-featured menu than what we saw with Draw.io. So I'm going to add a process shape. I'm going to add a diamond, and then do the same thing. I will click and click, and then add a sub-process. And because I want my slightly modified start shape here, I'm going to Control D, which is a common shortcut in many apps for duplicating a shape. I'm going to Control D to duplicate it, and I will double click to change it to say end, and I can use this. Here's a minor difference in Creately. There's no way to fire an arrow across the gap. I have to drag it. So I click and drag to add an arrow. Not a big deal, but it's there. And then do the same thing down below. Now, I want to point out something unusual about Draw.io, and that is if I choose to drag a shape like this process shape, you notice when you drag it, it's in minimized form. It's going to end up being this big, but it's in minimized form, which makes aligning it a little bit more awkward. You don't get the dynamic feedback that you get with most drawing apps, that things, so things are aligned before you drop them on the page. So now I dropped it, and sure enough, now I have to manually move it over to make sure it's aligned where I want it. So I don't know why they're minimized when you drag them on, but they are. And I can complete by doing this and doing the same thing here to make my flowchart look like it did with the other software. Just checking my notes here. Positive spacing, feedback, no way to fire arrows. Yep, mentioned that. Let's talk about hyperlinks for just a second. And I'm going to do something similar, but to create the sub process, because this is a big workspace, not a page in a diagram, all I need to do is go somewhere else on the workspace to create my little sub process. So let's drop a start shape. And because I'm picky, I'm going to do that one more time here. And I'll just add a couple of quick shapes. 1 and 2. And duplicate this and put it over here. So far so good. We've got sub process. Now I don't really need to hyperlink to it, although I might want to because this workspace might be really large. The option to create a hyperlink is, oops, I have to find it here. I forget. There we go. It's a menu, a context menu that pops up, and there's a link symbol here. But unfortunately, the only kind of link you can create in Creately, as far as I can tell, is a link to a URL, which perhaps there probably is a way to get a URL to another section of the workspace. I didn't dive that deep, but it's a little bit obscure. It's not an obvious thing like it was in Draw.io. So I would rate that as a -1 for Creately in terms of hyperlinking. If I want to create a diagram link, I can certainly do that. So I can, pardon me, a document link. I can certainly do that. This is that policy manual. I'm going to select this shape, click on the hyperlink symbol, and now I'll paste that same URL to my OneDrive, and we'll see something interesting. We saw that this link worked just fine in some reason that link didn't take. Let's try that one more time here. There we go. Two things. We saw that this link worked in Draw.io. Second thing is, something radical happened here. One of my pet peeves about most drawing applications is that you don't have any way of knowing visually that a hyperlink exists. Creately, put one right here. In fact, let me zoom in just so you can fully appreciate that little chain link symbol there. Anyone glancing at this map has added value by the fact that, hey, a hyperlink exists. They know that without even having to wonder or hover over it. In Visio, you have to hover over a shape to know that there's a hyperlink. Well, this one tells you. Now, in terms of following it, we can click on the link. And it actually, when I hover over the shape, it says control click. So remember to do that. Control click, and it follows that link. But for some reason, the way this document is stored in the Creately workspace, it doesn't allow me to hyperlink to my OneDrive. There may be some permission options that I have to set somewhere, but it worked by default in Draw.io. It's not working by default in Creately. Just take a note of that. Let's move on to a swim lane diagram. I'm going to, once again, just find a new clean space, and I need my swim lanes, and they are right here in the flowchart category, kind of where I expected them, but didn't find them in Draw.io. Here are my swim lanes, and once again, I can make this manager, VP, and admin. And let's drop a couple of shapes. We've got a start shape, and I won't bother to fiddle with its size. Let's go with a flowchart. Now I'm going to use the auto draw mechanism here to add my I have to deselect the shape before you can click once to get the buttons to appear. I'm going to now add my decision diamond. I'm going to put it directly into the VP lane and do the same thing now to add my alternate, my no option. Now, here's an interesting thing. Notice that the first link that you create out of a decision diamond is automatically labeled yes. You can see that there. That's actually not what I want. So I'm going to undo. Yes is the other path. Yes is the one that leads to having a sub-process. And so that's now labeled yes. And the second one that I create automatically from a decision diamond will be automatically labeled no. So I like that it's automatic. You just have to keep in mind that you map the yes path first. And for most of us who are accustomed to drawing process maps, the happy path, so-called, is the thing we tend to draw first. So that's actually not unreasonable. By the way, what I was fumbling with the diagram there because what I was doing was holding down the shift key and rolling the mouse wheel, which in many diagramming software will move the what's in view left and right. Mouse wheel by itself moves up and down. Shift mouse wheel moves left, right. Not in Creately. It turns out right click to pan is the solution. Now that also works in other drawing apps, but the specifically shift mouse wheel does not pan left, right in Creately. So let's zoom in a little bit. Let's add our end shape. And we'll put both of those up here in this lane. And now let's try the same trick we did with Draw IO. I'm going to select the swim lane and I'm going to make it larger so that it encompasses the predefined process and the start. And what happens when I now move the swim lane diagram? Does everything go with it? Yes. So Creately automatically adds encompassed shapes into lanes and into the swim lane structure. So that's good news. And finally, let's tackle BPMN. To do that, I need to click on More Shapes. And similar to what we did in Draw IO, we're going to scroll down here in the business category. We've got a number of subcategories here, and one of those is process. And within process, we have BPMN flows. Now, remember that the BPMN stencils in Draw IO, there were 4 of them, and they were full of shapes. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of them. When I look at BPMN flows here, this is it. That's all we get. Does that seem like a bad thing? Well, initially it might, but let's try something. Let's drop this start shape. Let's add and notice, by the way, this context menu automatically shows BPMN shapes where before it showed flowchart shapes. So here's a process. Let's add a decision. And oh, actually, for true BPMN, I need to add another process shape. I'm not going to belabor the point for why, other than the rules of BPMN and the way that gateways are used is a little bit different. Let's take this gateway shape. What we want to do now is we want to set the type for this shape. So I want to, this is the request new staff member shape. I want to indicate that that's a task done by a user because that's an important distinction in BPMN. So I'm going to click on this shape until this click once to get this pop-up menu. And what we see here are a set of ways to configure this shape. So I'm going to click on this little envelope and choose user, and that causes a specific symbol to appear in the upper left corner per the specs for BPMN. And just for the sake of example, I'll take this one and call it something else. Maybe this is a manual task, so the hand appears. And while we're at it, let's just keep going here. And let me add the sub-process shape because in BPMN, that is actually another task shape. So I'm going to add this task shape, but we need to configure it. So let's select it. And we're going to use this drop-down to indicate that this is a sub-process shape. And that plus sign in the bottom is the BPMN format for indicating a sub-process or predefined process. So I could keep going and you get the idea here, but it's these 3 buttons, the 2 that I've used so far, and this third one, which has to do with special BPMN types that can cause things like bold lines or double lines to appear outside a shape. Again, I don't want to dive too far into BPMN. I've got a resource slide at the end to give you some places to go for more information. But what I love about Creately is that it is really well suited to creating BPMN diagrams. They've done a nice job of making the shapes configurable. I will point out one little bit of oddness. If I drag one of these minimized shapes out from BPMN, oh, I've said, I take it back. That was not the thing I wanted to show you. Yep, not sure what it was. Sorry, little brain lapse there. All right, it's quarter of. I've got to do two things quickly here. I'm going to show you EdrawMax. This is a product that is both, show you the slides first. Here's my Creately summary. EdrawMax is a product from a member of a family of products from a company called Wondershare that is a diagram maker. It has, I'm going to go to the pros and cons slide first because it is the most like Visio, which some people would consider to be a positive, and it's the most like Visio, which some people would consider to be less positive. So I put that in both columns here. There is both a browser capability and a separate app. I have the separate app here. I'm going to create a flowchart, and I've got a variety of types of flowcharts, or I can create a blank flowchart. Let's do that. And it did that for me, dropped a few shapes on the page. And you understand by now what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop a start shape on the page. Now, here the start shape is a circle, much like BPMN, where in reality, what I want is actually the terminator shape, which is labeled start or terminator. And I've
So
just clicked
Scott,
to drop
we
one on
don't
page.
we don't see anything. We just
Oh,
see we just see a black screen. We see your mouse.
that's a very curious thing about Wondershare. And tell me whether that's true in the browser version as well. Let me go to Wondershare. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
What I discovered the other day is that all of the things that, let me get to the same place here. Create a file anyway. Do you see the
We
browser?
yep, we see the browser version.
Okay, fascinating. So the app, and I'll put it on one more time. For some reason, I can't take screenshots from the app, the Wondershare app. I can't use the magnifier capability. It just goes black, and I hadn't realized the whole thing went black. The whole screen went black if I'm sharing the whole app. Very strange.
We'll put that in the con column.
Yeah, yeah. I'll have to add that. I actually think I forgot to include that. Um, all right, so I just have a couple minutes here. I want to point out that the start shape is perfectly formed. It's the right dimensions, so that's good. The app works nicely with letting you add shapes, so we can add the appropriate shapes here. I can drag them as always, and that all works fine. So the flowchart capabilities of this product are just fine. They work very nicely. They, just checking here, you draw, looking for any unique features I want to call out. One thing I like a lot, if I add a document shape, the range of hyperlink types, so this is my policy manual, for example, my range of hyperlink types is extensive. So if I right click and choose insert hyperlink, you get a dialog. And again, I'm going to zoom in on this. So let me, please let me know if it doesn't show up. You can zoom hyperlink directly to another page. If you have multiple pages in the document, they will show on a dropdown. You can even link directly to a specific shape on the page and zoom in on it, which is a nice feature. You can link to a URL. You can link to documents both locally and in the cloud. The browser app only shows you cloud documents. The desktop app allows you to save to your desktop. The So hyperlinking is definitely a strength in this product. The swim lane diagrams, checking my notes here, nothing particularly unusual there. BPMN is kind of in between what we saw with Draw.io and Creately. So you can, the shapes are configurable in much the same way that we've seen. All right, I've seen lots of questions go by. I know I haven't even paused to consider a question. Let me do that. Let me wrap up a couple of slides here and get this. All right, now my cursor is acting strangely. Let's get out of Zoom mode. That should restore it. It did. So sorry, I don't usually talk to myself quite this much. So Wondershare, we got some pros and cons here, both a browser app and just Windows. There are no apps available for Mac OS and Linux. Finally, Visio. I'm not going to demonstrate this now because I don't really need to, but I would just want to make the point that there actually is a completely free version of Visio if you have a Microsoft 365 license. So it is available. It's free. If you have Microsoft 365, it's there. It looks like this. We have templates or flowcharting, several different types of flowcharts. The limitation of the free version, it includes that you have a smaller number of diagram types than if you're paying for Visio, including there is no swim lane, no BPMN for the free version of Visio. Browser only. You need to have one of the subscriptions to Visio or a paid version of Visio in order to have the downloadable desktop app. I've shown you 4 free products. There are lots more that are either free or have free versions plus a premium version. LucidChart is one we're going to talk about next time. Visio and TaskMap we'll talk about as well. These others are all available. They're all out there. You're welcome to do a search for them and experiment with them on your own. There are some very nice, specific specialized diagramming tools. If you're into creating value stream maps, check out EVSM. Spiff Workflow is an interesting company that takes BPM and diagrams, combines them with some Python scripting code, and allows you to create a diagram and then execute the process. So definitely check out Spiff Workflow if you're interested in executing. And then there are a whole range of enterprise grade products, of which these are some of the prominent ones. Again, I'm putting these here just for reference, not because I'm going to talk about them in any detail. And let's get to questions.
All right. Well, because I'm so rusty, I forgot to turn on the upvoting. So I'm just going to take also, nobody could see the questions, only once they've been answered. So apologies. Um, so we'll just go in the order they came in. So this
Okay.
is from James. James says, I know it's not process mapping, but do you have any suggestions for free tools for drawing conceptual data models or diagrams? Draw.io works okay, but was wondering if there was anything else.
I haven't looked specifically, James, for those kinds of diagrams. In the free tools category, I would definitely try EdrawWorks, or EdrawMax, the last tool that I showed you briefly, or Creately, because both of them have a fairly wide range of diagram types.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, James, for that question. Gloria, I think, was interested in the process mapping symbols that you showed when you started. Yep,
I just
that
saw that. There
slide.
we are.
Yep. All right. So Gloria, there you go. Get your screenshot tool out. You can grab a screenshot of that. Thank you.
You can also download the slides, and I'll put
And
that
they're on the
QR code up.
slides. That's true.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to mention you did a 3-part series on process mapping fundamentals. Oh, I just realized my camera's not on. Where you went into a lot of the how-to. I know there was some questions about how to do certain things. For members, those are available in our webinar archive.
Right. And if you're not a member, I'll talk about my LinkedIn Learning course on that same subject in a moment. But you're right, Susan, what I did
Yeah.
last fall in those 3 parts was to talk about ideas about process mapping without talking about software specifically. The focus for this series is just the opposite. It's let's look at software. Let's see what software can do for us.
Yes, exactly. All right. So Stephen asked, can diagrams be created in one of the products you're showing and then move to another? And there was actually a couple of questions around
Hmm.
this. Can I create it one, open it and edit it in some other tool?
The answer is maybe. It depends. Classic BA answer, right? Some of the products have import and export capabilities to and from Visio. Um, EdrawMax is one that I remember specifically. I think Draw.io might, and Creately probably does too. So I didn't explore that specifically for this session today, but look at them and you'll see that many do. Visio is the most common denominator. LucidChart that we'll talk about next time definitely can import and export. But the reason I say it depends and maybe is because what you get when you export to another product diagram type is likely to be usable to some extent, but probably will not have all of the features of the application that you exported to or imported from. So it's going to be a little tricky. Worth
You get
trying.
it. Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna skip around a little bit.
Okay.
What do you think about Miro as a process mapping tool?
Yeah, Miro is very much in the category like Creately. It's basically a whiteboarding and collaboration tool, but it allows you to create diagrams of various types. So very similar to what I showed you with Creately. I haven't created a flowchart or swim lane diagram specifically in Miro or Mural recently enough to compare it any more specifically than that. But first and foremost, those are collaboration tools with a big workspace on which you can put all kinds of things, including process maps.
Yeah. Raj wants to know of the free tools that you've talked about today, do you have a recommended one?
You're asking somebody with a very strong bias, Raj, because I'm a Visio MVP.
Right. Visio MVP's talking.
Of the three that I showed you today, I think the EdrawMax is the most capable. Now, I mentioned it's the most Visio-like, and that's not the reason I say it's the most capable, but it seems to have the largest set of capabilities that are specific to creating process maps. Lots of other kinds of diagrams too. If you're specifically interested in BPMN, I go back to Creately because I really like what they've done in allowing you to create or in providing a set of very configurable BPMN shapes.
All right. And maybe this will be the last question because we've just got 2 more minutes and then I'm going to
Okay.
let you talk about your resources. Of the tools that you shared today, do any of them support integration with AI?
Yes, most do. And that will be the topic of the January webcast. Um, Creately and EdrawMax have the strongest AI assists right now. I'm told that Draw.io has an AI capability, but I can't find it. So I don't know whether it's something in beta or you have to ask for it. I don't know. It's not obvious on their website anyway. Visio actually doesn't. That's the one of the four today. That's the one that has no AI capability at present.
Oh my goodness. All right.
Yeah, surprise there, especially with Copilot pervasive through the rest of the Microsoft suite.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to leave the last minute for you to go through the resources for folks
Okay,
today.
thank you. And I will do my best. Susan will provide me with all the questions. And if I'm able to, I will compile a document with additional answers and make that available. But for right now, thank you for your questions. I mentioned BPMN and more resources. Here are three books that are worthwhile. The BPMN style method and style is sort of the classic. It's been around for at least a decade, longer, I think. And Bruce Silver, who wrote it, is sort of the guru for the best ways to use best practices for using BPMN. There's a second edition. That's what this cover is. Very recent book, a gentleman named Kevin Tan. If you search for him on LinkedIn, you'll find that he posts all the time about BPMN. New book called Process BPMN Made Easy with Processability. He's got some very specific ideas for making BPMN behave the way you and your business users want it to. And then actually Creately has a pretty nice summary document. I was impressed. I downloaded this. They require your email address to get a download. But the what is BPMN document that they've put together, the PDF, is actually a nice summary. So those are good resources to have. I mentioned my LinkedIn Learning courses. Those are here on the right. The two most relevant for this topic are the first one, just released in June of this year. So it's just a couple months old at this point. Fundamentals of Process Mapping. It's actually a roughly an hour course that summarizes much of what I talked about in the webcast I did for Susan last fall that we've talked about a couple of times. Creating flowcharts for beginners is a short course, just looking at some techniques for getting started with creating flowcharts. And then I've got a number of courses related to Visio, Power BI, data visualization, and so forth. TaskMap we'll talk about another time, not necessary for today. And then finally, here's that download link and contact information. So please feel free to download a copy of the slides. There are links in it to those books, links in it to the various tools that I demonstrated, as well as those pros and cons that I talked through and talked around. And with that, thank you all for your attention. I'm so pleased that so many of you not only registered, but actually showed up today. Thank you kindly. I see lots of thumbs ups and hearts, and I've seen you all reacting during the session, as Susan pointed out early at the very beginning. I do notice that it does make a big difference. So thank you. If you
Yeah.
have additional comments, I'd love to know about it. That's why my email address is here.
And also thanks to those that were joining us on YouTube. I
Yeah,
took a peek. We had about 40 people that were joining us there. So they appreciated the opportunity to join us. All
thank you.
righty. Thank you all. And we will see you, if we don't see you next week for our next free webinar, then we will see you for part 2 of this webinar, which is coming in, what month is it?
October.
October.
Yep.
I don't know what month it is, Scott. All right.
It's next month.
I know,
We
yeah.
made it easy. It's October.
All right. Take care, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.